Gillian Timon, and I'm the Executive Director of TRIAD Addiction Recovery Services. On behalf of our Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you to our 4th annual breakfast. We're glad you're all here. I'd like to start our program this morning by thanking the sponsors of this event, Superior Electric Service Company, represented by its owner, Jim Fitzsimmons, and Mike Kelly from the McCarter English Law Firm, a member of our board. Thanks to both of you for making this event possible. I would also like to welcome our local politicians who are here this morning. County Executive Matt Meyer, State Senator Stephanie Hansen, and President of the City Council, Hanifa Shabazz. And I'd like to thank the TRIAD board members for their ongoing support of our organisation. If you would, please stand so we can acknowledge you. Thank you. We have a great program lined up for you today, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our speakers. Our keynote speaker is former First Lady of Delaware, Carla Markell. Eleanor Gregory, who will share her experience with TRIAD, and Rich Priswara, the Chief Operating Officer of Ashley Addiction Treatment, who will close our program today. For those of you who are not very familiar with TRIAD, I thought it might be helpful to give you a brief overview. TRIAD was founded in 1976 and has been an independent non-profit organization since 2013. We provide free counseling, referral, and education services to individuals and their families who are affected by addiction. We also coordinate nearly 20 12-step group meetings in our community room each week. TRIAD believes that addiction is a treatable disease, and we advocate a compassionate and confidential recovery process that restores people to freedom and health. At our breakfast last year, I spoke about the terrible toll addiction is taking on our nation as a whole. Over the course of my first year at TRIAD, I have become increasingly aware of the local impact of addiction and the challenges we are facing in our community. With the opioid epidemic in the headlines on a regular basis, I thought it would be pertinent to share some statistics on drug abuse in particular. For example, there are more drug-induced deaths in Delaware than there are motor vehicle and gun fatalities. Our fatal drug overdose rate is 13th in the nation, and this does not reflect the thousands more people who are hospitalized, institutionalized, or incarcerated as a result of their drug abuse. Delaware has the 3rd highest per capita health care cost in the nation for drug abuse, and yet our treatment capacity is less than 1/3 of what is needed. TRIAD's aim is to help address these issues. While counseling may not be the first step in a person's recovery process, it plays an important role in the treatment of addiction. According to the US Department of Health and Human Services, and I quote, individualized counseling helps the patient develop coping strategies and tools to abstain from alcohol and drug abuse and maintain abstinence. TRIAD helps people get and stay clean and sober. Our clients can attest to that. TRIAD is responding to the need for treatment as rapidly as we can. Our counseling program was running at full capacity last year with more new clients than we could accept. A couple of generous foundation grants have enabled us to expand our counseling team. This year, we have already added 2 new counselors and a program coordinator to our team, Mallory Giles, Suzanne Kirk, and Chloe Ragg. Ladies, please stand. We intend to add several more counsellors in the coming months to meet the increasing demand for our services. Thanks to several other generous grants, TRIAD has also been able to put in place many of the much-needed infrastructure components to make our counselling program more effective. We've been able to renovate our counselling offices, install new technology, and complete several critical marketing projects, including a rebranding initiative and the development of a new website. All these projects support our growth and help us operate more efficiently. Over the past year, we have been working to establish relationships and collaboration with a wide network of partner organizations in the local recovery community, several of whom are here today. They enable us to make better referrals for clients who require additional treatment options. And TRIAD has expanded its educational programs. Earlier this year, we were proud to host the Deputy Director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and we have launched a new monthly recovery program called Wholehearted Living, designed especially for women. Other programs are planned for later this year. Organizationally, TRIAD has also come a long way over the last year. In total, we have recruited 8 new board members, each of whom brings valuable skills, experience, and enthusiasm to our team. They will help us achieve our strategic objectives and guide us into the future. All in all, TRIAD has accomplished much since our last breakfast, and we are a better organization for it. But we still need your help. While we have received generous grants for capital projects and new staff, we still need support to cover general management and operating expenses for our growing organization. We hope you will consider making a donation today. You can help us continue to make a positive difference in the lives of people in our community who are trying to recover from addiction. And now, before we enjoy our breakfast, I'll ask one of our board members, the Reverend Patty Downing, to give the invocation.
Thank you, Jillian, and thank all of you for coming today. I'm Patty Downing. I serve as the rector of Trinity Episcopal Church in Wilmington. Let us pray. O blessed Lord, you minister to all who came to you. Look with compassion upon all who through addiction have lost their health and freedom. Restore to them the assurance of your unfailing mercy. Remove from them the fear that besets them. Strengthen them in the work of their recovery, and to those who care for them, give patient understanding and persevering love. Bless the food at our table, bless the conversation around the table, bless the hands that grew and prepared the food, and bless each one of us this day and always. Amen.
I'd like to, good morning, thank you for being here. It's just a glorious day outside, isn't it? I mean, it's so beautiful, and it's just, I guess we deserve that in a certain sense. The type of things that our people do and the counselors, we kind of deserve a day like this. Just so we know, Lorraine Thalheimer, who we're honoring, is our second counselor, and she is one of the original volunteers though. So she was with TRIAD in 1976 when it first started. And that was when we had the drop-in clinic and the counseling. And Lorraine evolved into our second counselor. She's extremely important to why we're here today. I was talking to Dixie, who's the founder of, one of the founders of TRIAD, and we were going through the process. And what he told me is Lorraine evolved into the counselor. She started as a volunteer. And then there was Dorothy Chale, who was the first counselor, and Lorraine took over from her. On top of helping out at TRIAD and counseling, Lorraine expanded her practice and took it into the prisons. And she helped people there. And in fact, we've recently added a board member, Eric Robinson, who will help us with that. He's with the department, he has connections with the Department of Corrections. And Lorraine took the practice in there, and people came out of the system and were able to obtain counseling at TRIAD. But here's the wonderful thing I learned. At one point, the drop-in clinic stopped happening. And so TRIAD's sitting there, and what happens? Lorraine kept the lights on at TRIAD. The reason we can say that we are continually around since 1976 is because of Lorraine, which is just amazing when you think about it. When all others, when there wasn't as much formality and we didn't have as much support as we're getting from you today, Lorraine was there, helping and providing her services to people in need for free. And that's why today we're going to recognize Lorraine Thalheimer for her honorable service with TRIAD since 1976. Lorraine, could you come up?
That's great. That's fine. Thank you. There's John. Love you. Thank you all so much. I am surviving my alcoholism, but I did not survive a car crash. Because I was left after a red light runner years ago. Anyway, instead of accepting an award for TRIAD today, I should give TRIAD one. It was an awesome experience. We started out very primitive, and I will say today, we've come a long way, baby, for TRIAD. I want to thank you all so much for being here and lending your support to TRIAD. It has been amazing what's going on down there, and thank you so very, very much.
Yes.
And he's a shining star. He's absolutely phenomenal.
We're very proud to have him on the board.
I call him, I feel like a mother chick, a mother hen with her chick.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to invite our treasurer, Dan Johnson, to introduce a TRIAD group member, Eleanor Gregory, to share her personal story.
I'll be really brief. Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for coming out. We really appreciate your support. It's amazing when I look out and I think about 2 years when we had about a quarter of this number of people that came out, and it's really a wonderful thing. I'm treasurer of TRIAD. I've been on the board about 5 years now as treasurer. And it's been a crazy experience. It's been a lot of fun and very, very rewarding. And it's something that's very near and dear to me to do this. I want to introduce Eleanor Gregory. She's a very close friend of mine and a longtime friend of TRIAD's. And she's here to share with you her experience, strength, and hope. A very warm welcome for Eleanor, please.
Hi, I'm Eleanor. As Dan alluded, I've had a long relationship with TRIAD, and I'm delighted you all have rallied this morning. I'm thinking you have or will be hearing a lot about alcoholism, addiction, and the drug epidemic. So this is just my story and how I ended up in front of you today. I grew up in the town of Louisville in the 70s, home of bluegrass, bourbon, and the Kentucky Derby. For us, the spirits industry was what the DuPont Company was for you. It employed our families, donated to the community, sponsored annual events, and we took pride in it. We also aspired to drink like our parents. I even remember presenting a science project explaining the process of fermentation to fifth graders. And yes, I did get an A. As teenagers, we had affirmed don't ask, don't tell policy in full effect regarding booze. I do remember being chastised around 17 But again, not so much for actually consuming the bourbon, but for mixing it with Coca-Cola, which was a seriously big no-no. The only acceptable choices were on the rocks and with a splash of seltzer. Yes, times were different. Back then, police officers kindly escorted my parents and other disoriented drinkers home with only a small wave of acknowledgement because that just was the way it was. Again, times were different. This year for Mother's Day, my daughter and I watched a favorite of my mom's we lost this year, the classic Breakfast at Tiffany's. It's a 1962 rom-com starring dashingly handsome George Peppard with music by Henry Mancini. It's a great film, you should see it if you haven't. What could be inappropriate for a 13-year-old, I thought? Well, I'd forgotten that alcohol is the unsung hero in literally every scene, morning, noon, and night. The actors, all so sophisticated and elegantly dressed, were really just a case study in falling down intoxication. And let's be real here. Nobody looks like Audrey Hepburn after a night like that. In my 20s, I ran in the foodie circles of a Western ski resort. It all seemed pretty legit, but underneath the facade of decanted burgundies, a shadow of bad choices and repercussions crept across my soul. On my 29th birthday, I decided enough was enough. I was engaged to be married, successful, the world literally at my feet. Yet underneath it all, fear and anxiety, two of the clinical hallmarks of this disease of alcoholism and addiction, bloomed into full-blown panic. That year leading up to my 30th birthday was pockmarked by attempts to quit, followed by the shame of failure over and over again. Alcohol had a stranglehold on me that I'd not been aware of until I attempted to quit. It finally sunk in. My life was unmanageable. Alcohol was at the helm, and I needed to mutiny. I consulted my physician. I'm lucky enough to have a physician, and did consult them, and when asked the dreaded question, "So how much do you drink, Eleanor?" I could only muster the dishonest, yet expected answer that almost all of us give, about 2 drinks a day. I was unwilling at that time to admit the truth, that those drinks were from 18-ounce Tervis tumblers. So my friends and family, they pretty much drank the way I did. So when I made this resolve to quit, instead of support, I got, "You're fine, just cut back. Switch to wine." And the oh ever so helpful, "Just learn to drink like a lady." You see, no one wanted to apply the label alcoholic because, as we know, this is social suicide. But thankfully, I was at a crossroads. It was clear I was either going to get honest and commit to this new path or ride this runaway train to the inevitable end. The one mentor who did show up for me was my dad. He'd quit drinking while a vice president of an international alcohol conglomerate when I was 16 years old. I can't imagine how hard that road was for him, nor how excruciating the social pressure. But on the good side, it planted a seed in me. Although everyone knew that it was a terrible idea to quit drinking, at the time, when I was ready to sober up, I had my father's blueprint to follow. My mother, unfortunately, chose a different path and drank to the end. A great irony is that ever since, more than 30 years later, my dad is still labeled the alcoholic, whereas my mom's erratic behavior was brushed off with a sidelong glance, a snicker, and something to the effect of, "Yeah, your mother, she sure is a pistol." Undoubtedly, my family history predisposed me to addiction, or as my father warned, "Sweetie, you got a double-barreled shotgun pointed right at you." And he was right. This is an inheritable condition that affects the socializing, communication, and behavioral centers of the brain. The American Medical Association declared alcoholism a disease way back in 1956. I did not know that. But unfortunately, it is still often labeled a moral failing. The same way, a basketball player with NBA aspirations cannot just think his legs longer. Self-knowledge does not solve addiction. But we are here this morning for hope, and there is plenty of good news. Early intervention arrests those brain changes, and people receiving treatment do get better. Recovery is, quite frankly, the best secret in town. You probably have neighbors, teachers, nurses, church members, all who have changed their lives thanks to TRIAD and other community outreaches. We all know how to spot and name addiction, but recovery is often overlooked. After around 8 years of sobriety, my recovery took a dive. I was compliant. I spoke to sponsors, I went to meetings, I did everything I was told to do. That said, a life event was the trigger, and although I didn't drink, I became vulnerable to all those insecurities that had made drinking look good in the first place. I, like so many people with addictive tendencies, have what is referred to as a dual diagnosis. Psychological disorders go together, hand in hand with addiction, just the same way that heart disease and high blood pressure correlate. These comorbidities must both be addressed for a healthy, lasting outcome. For me, that was a dark time. I needed more help than the rooms of AA could offer, and TRIAD, very thankfully, was there for me. There is a saying that we're only as sick as our secrets, but in a society not yet willing to have a truly open dialogue, this can be tricky to overcome. Like all of us, addicts need to be seen and heard, but labels make us want to hide and not seek help. We all know TRIAD holds numerous meetings, but unfortunately, the scope of its success is also limited by that title. So with your help, we can spread the word that through ongoing relapse prevention and counseling, TRIAD is the bridge between getting sober and living a life of recovery. Happily, I am no longer just the label alcoholic. My teenager has never seen me drink. My sister is my best friend. I own a business focused on healthy living. These are all direct results of the ministry of TRIAD. On a personal note, I know a lot of you, and a lot of you are not in the recovery community. So I really debated on, for lack of a better term, outing myself today in this forum. I have held my anonymity close for 16 years, and know that you will respect my choice when you leave here today. The words addict and alcoholic are loaded with emotion, disdain, and ultimately fear of the unknown. And I get it. Please remember, though, that recovery is a positive process. I hope that when you see me, you will see my fullness, my identity, and that the word alcoholic will be relegated to just a footnote. So today, please join me in celebrating recovery, the human spirit, and extending the hand of charity to those most in need. I can personally attest that your donations are life-changing and moving us towards grace. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Eleanor. That was great. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I knew I'd forget to acknowledge someone, and I have indeed done that, and I apologize. I'd like to recognize this morning Brian Gordon, who is with us here, representing Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long, who was unable to attend. Thanks for coming. And now I'd like to invite Becky Flood to the podium. She's a board member and president and CEO of Ashley Addiction Treatment, and she's going to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, former First Lady of Delaware, Carla Markell. Thanks, Becky.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank TRIAD, especially for the life-changing work that they do since 1976. I'd especially like to thank Dixie Sanger for his visionary leadership at the very beginning. I'd like to thank the Reverend Patricia Dowling, oh, there she is, okay, for sustaining TRIAD during some difficult times. And I'd like to thank Jillian for your current leadership. This morning, it's a great honor and a privilege to introduce a person who I personally love and admire. One I have had the opportunity to sit with in homeroom at Downs Elementary School, travel through middle school at Central, and then eventually graduate with from Newark High School. We then traveled through our college years, you working and me eating at Friendly's on Elkton Road. One of us had to work. And then we ended up at Seabrook House in our early adult years working together. And then, of course, our first political campaign working for SB Wu together. And of course, amongst all those years, we shared other things, such as birthing of children, plays in New York City, marriage, and even death, which really means we've shared the agonies and ecstasies, all that life has to offer. There's only one true thing that has bound us together through the 5 decades and growing, is our friendship. Since she is often the first person that I call when anything happens, good, bad, or indifferent. To all of you here, she has also been a friend in many, many ways. She served as our First Lady for 8 years. As the First Lady, she always presented, as she will today, I'm sure, with elegance, dignity, intelligence, and grace. She was committed during those 8 years to many things. The beautification of the governor's home and guest house, to the arts in Delaware, but the cornerstone was your volunteerism, and it still remains today. But probably what touched us all most during her years of public service was that she personally shared her own story, her family's history of how the devastation of addiction impacts a family. But she also shared how heroic recovery can be. She has truly been a friend to all of us that work in the addiction field as she helped destigmatize the disease right here in our own backyard, in our community, and within our own personal families. She bridged gaps, opened doors, and provided opportunities to all who wish to enter the journey of recovery. So without further ado, I give to you today our friend, Carla Markell.
Thank you, Becky. I do love you dearly, like a sister. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I wanted to also make sure everybody knew that Richard Leff is here. He's an elected official from nearby in Pennsylvania. We've brought out all of our other elected officials, and I wanted to make sure that you and Sarah both are recognized, because we know Sarah's the one that really does a lot of the hard work for you, right? Always the woman behind the man, right? Or the man behind the woman, as the case may be. So good morning, everybody. It's wonderful you're here on this gorgeous day. I'm grateful to be a part of TRIAD's celebration and annual breakfast. And Jillian, your leadership is really transformative. I think you've brought a whole new energy to TRIAD. And frankly, I mean, I never really knew all the things TRIAD did until we had our meeting. I knew that you helped people in the addiction treatment field, but I didn't really understand the degree of the services that you provided. You've got a fantastic board of directors, you've got the A-team, a lot of really special, wonderful people with great recovery and leadership skills in our community. So congratulations on developing such a Class A team. Some of you are aware, many of you are aware, as Becky just shared, that I'm the child of 2 alcoholic parents and numerous other addicted family members. I've been open about sharing this story because I've grown to believe that there's tremendous power in sharing our stories to help other people achieve their own recovery. We're very open when we have cancer, heart disease, other kinds of health issues, and my dream is that someday our community and our state and our country and even the world talk about addiction as a health issue as we do all of our other health issues that are out there. I think it's the only way to really get through things in a loving and caring way, and every family that's going through it certainly needs the love and support of their community and their friends. So that's one reason I decided to share my own personal story. And when Jack was thinking about running for governor, I had a lot of fear about my story coming out and what that might do to kind of pollute his political world. And I talked to my mother, and to her credit, she's now 40 years sober. She said, if our story helps somebody else, you should feel free to share it wherever you go. And that was empowering to me, and I'm really grateful to her for encouraging me to do that. I give her a lot of credit. So my parents were divorced, and my single mother struggled with severe depression. To this day, she still does. She is sober, but she still struggles with her mental health issues. She was addicted to prescription drugs and alcohol, and needless to say, our family life was chaotic. My brother and I were largely unsupervised, living in low-income apartment complexes and housing, moving on average every year or 2. It was not an easy life in many ways, and I was filled with a mix of shame and fear, as well as an overdeveloped sense of responsibility for all that was happening in our crazy family life. There was rage, irrational thinking, neglect, poverty, drama, all mixed in with a mother who was largely honest, open, straightforward. My kids know her well, and they sort of get a kick out of those parts about her. She also exposed me to the arts and did a lot of really good things that I think helped to make me who I am today. But, her sense of humor, she loved me the best as she could, but it didn't negate all the challenges that we were dealing with at home. They often say that family members are sicker than the addict. And of course, many addicts are also family members. So you can see where the cycles are difficult to break when it comes to the family disease of addiction. No matter what your background is when it comes to being raised in a family of addicted parents, there are a lot of challenges that you have to figure out and patterns of behavior that you really need to take a look at so that you don't continue to perpetuate the codependency. Those of you who are family members know what it's like to tiptoe around the addict, to be fearful of making mistakes or setting them off. You feel responsible for their actions. Like, was it something I did that made her pick up today? Was it something I didn't do that made her pick up today? But the 12-step programs really taught me that I didn't cause it, I couldn't cure it, and the more I fed into the sick behavior of my parents, the worse things would get. And luckily, through the meetings, I learned a lot about how to take care of myself and not enable my parents. And I put boundaries around my experiences with them. I would say, if you're drinking, then I'm not going to be there. If you pick up when I'm there, I'm going to leave. And I was just very clear. I learned to divorce myself, if you will, from the behaviors that they were exhibiting so that I didn't allow myself to be polluted with the environment that they were creating, which was really empowering for me. And it really taught me a lot about independence and self-empowerment. I didn't feel like a victim as much when I was able to take charge of my own circumstances. So today I want to talk about, this is just for this audience that I think of as probably being a little progressive, I want to talk about some of the F words. And when I say the F words, as a former First Lady, I can be frank, right, with all of you. But the first one I want to talk about is fear. Fear is paralyzing. It's been talked about earlier. Eleanor mentioned it, and I think that was a great talk, Eleanor, by the way. Thank you so much for sharing your story today. It's great. Great job. But fear is paralyzing. It's a natural defense we create to protect ourselves. Fear holds us back from being able to move forward and try things. It disables and stunts our growth. And my foundation was built on fear. I had huge anxieties. I would blush at the drop of a hat. If somebody looked at me and asked me my opinion about something, I would shrink, underneath the table practically. It was a very painful time for me to even be noticed. I wanted to disappear. I didn't want to be seen. I had learned to get past that, and it is something I consciously had to really work on, but it took a lot of time and growth, and probably not until my 30s that I really began to get comfortable in my own skin. The other word I want to talk about is faith. I am not a religious person, but I am a very spiritual person, and my spirituality has evolved over time as I always questioned, how could a loving and caring God put me in the situation that I was in? Why would God give me my circumstances and somebody else had all the privileges, in the world? And I always questioned that. But, I was sort of feeling sorry for myself, and I allowed myself to feel like a victim when I was younger. And I can remember going to the meetings and learning about the higher power. And the question was, can you at least believe that there's somebody who has power greater than you? And once I accepted that, I decided, yes, I could agree with that, and that enabled me to learn how to let go and let other, circumstances guide my decisions, but also know that I couldn't control everything that was going on around me. I think what I had learned growing up was that the more I controlled, the better my situation would be at home, but that doesn't really work too well in real life. You can't control everything out there. So you have to learn, I had to learn to turn it over to a higher power, to somebody greater than myself. So that faith has really been a source of guidance for me through all my years and has given me great comfort and guidance. I learned to put faith in front of fear, and I had to walk into my fear to be able to get through it and work through it. I remember quitting a job once where the values of the company that I worked for didn't line up with what I believed in, and I quit literally, having bills to pay and nowhere to turn, and I couldn't go to my parents for money because they really didn't have any money. But I had faith that I would somehow figure it out. But I also had to take charge. And I remember getting that book, What Color is Your Parachute? And going through all the things about, information meetings and how to go about. And that's when I actually I was sharing my story earlier at my table. I walked into my fear and picked up the phone and called the rehab that my mom had gone to when I was in high school, and asked if there were any opportunities that might be available. And that was really a transformative time for me. It took me literally an entire day to have the courage to pick up the phone and make the call, but I walked into that fear figuring, what have I got to lose? What's the worst thing that could happen? If I call and he says no, if I call and they say, well, there's no opportunity now, maybe there will be in the future, and I just made myself do it. Another very vivid memory of walking into my fear was when Jack first asked me out on a date, and I said no because I didn't want to, open the door to a relationship with somebody who was like a healthy, wonderful, great guy. I didn't want to pollute him and his world with my crazy family, and he believed in me, and more than I probably did at the time. So I walked into that fear with a sense of confidence, I guess, but it was cautious confidence. I was not 100% convinced that this was going to be able to work out, but truly, obviously, that turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. The other, for me, profound sense of fear that I can really recall walking into was when Jack wanted to run for governor, and I didn't want the public life. I didn't want to expose our kids to that world. And I was very, very nervous about it, and so much so that I almost fled, to use another F word. I really considered bailing, and his steadiness was a force for me. And he taught me that it isn't about me, it isn't about him, it's about the people we serve. And that was really a big breakthrough moment for me, because when you put your focus on the people you're serving, it removes you out of the whole equation. And when you can focus on the people you're serving, then you can find a lot more energy and a lot more strength and hope and guidance to be able to keep moving forward, because you can put your own fear and your own concerns aside. So I'm very grateful to Jack for teaching me that. It was a very valuable life lesson. Oh, I knew that would happen once. So anyway, so many life choices require a healthy risk. Putting yourself out there, getting past the voices of fear and insecurity in our heads, And I had to consider not allowing my background and shame and embarrassment of my family and my dysfunction from growing up. I didn't want that to define me. I didn't want that to be who I was. And I wanted to break the cycles. And I knew that I could if I made healthy choices to remove myself out of that situation. And I had to keep believing that I could live a healthy life. And to this day, it's a constant choice that I make. You know, I try to eat right, I try to model well for my kids, I try to exercise, I try to take care of myself. And I try not to take anything for granted. I try to live in a place of gratitude. And I really learned not to take anything personally, that the things that were happening in my family and in my circles around me of dysfunction were about them and not about me. I didn't have to internalize their sickness and make it my own. I could really break the cycle by changing behaviors and making choices that were different. Everybody is in their own place in terms of discomfort and like muddling through life. We're all trying to just get through it the best as we can. And, you know, I can remember even in my adult years being angry with my mother, you know, for her behaviors toward me in many ways, in her self-centered ways. And I realized, I read a great book about mental health, and it was really a breakthrough moment for me because I realized that's her sickness. It isn't like what she's doing to me personally. It's her behavior and it's her sickness. And with that moment, I had this kind of epiphany that she's a sick woman. I wouldn't be yelling at her if she had cancer. I wouldn't be yelling at her if she had heart disease. I wouldn't take it personally if she was suffering with those kinds of things. And it allowed me to remove myself from her pain and discomfort and instead just find compassion in my heart, to try to be good to her, do the right thing for her, walk into her home and do what's right without feeling angry or resentful. You know, I have a sense of humor about it, and, you know, we joke about different things, but I really tried to get out of the negative spinning that could happen, you know, with her behaviors toward me. So I guess the bottom line is, if you decide not to be a victim, you don't have to be a victim. If you live in a place of victimhood, the perpetrator, whether it's life or the people around you, circumstances or disease, they continue to have power over you forever. And I chose not to allow the disease that had really taken over my childhood. I decided I didn't want to allow it to take over my adulthood as well. I wanted to be the champion of my own life and not allow addiction to be the power over my family life as I was older. I learned that you have to find your fire in order to fuel you toward your passions and your interests. Too often, as family members, we're busy taking care of everybody around us and reacting to all the drama around us that we don't stop to find our own selves. And it becomes an excuse for many of us as family members to be caregiving and not do enough to find our own interests, our own hobbies, our own passions, because we're too busy caregiving. And that's something I still work on today, you know, raising kids, and they certainly encourage me to find my passions and do what's healthy and good for me. But it's an effort that I have to make because it's very easy for me to slip into the caregiving role. But I've learned to ground myself in daily self-care, as I said, trying to seize opportunities to exercise and take care of myself and spend time with my friends, and to make sure Jack and I get quality time together, to make sure I get quality time with my kids. And I try to catch myself when I have negative thoughts and consciously turn them around to refocus my patterns of my brain onto things that are positive, and to really find a place of gratitude. Because gratitude for me is a very powerful chemical reaction in my brain. When I can get into the mode of gratitude, I can let a lot of other negative thoughts go. So it's very helpful for me to walk into that light. I want to close with a poem that I always found very helpful to me when I was in my younger years, and even to this day. It's a poem that I actually got a copy of in a meeting back in my early 20s. And I would go to it whenever I was facing one of these crisis decisions, not a crisis decision, but a fearful decision, a decision that I was afraid of. And it's called Take a Risk, To Risk by William Arthur Ward. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but I'll close with this. To weep is to risk appearing sentimental. To reach out to another is to risk involvement. To expose feelings is to risk exposing your true self. To place your ideas and dreams before a crowd is to risk their loss. To love is to risk not being loved in return. To live is to risk dying. To hope is to risk despair. To try is to risk failure, but risks must be taken because the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. One may avoid suffering and sorrow, but one cannot learn to feel, to change, to grow, or to live. Chained by servitude, he or she is a slave who has forfeited all freedom. The pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, the realist adjusts to the sails. But to risk nothing is to gain nothing, and only the person who risks is really free. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. That was wonderful. And finally, I'd like to introduce Rich Prisawa, the Chief Operating Officer at Ashley Addiction Treatment, to say a few parting words. Rich has held multiple roles at local county and educational institutions where he has managed annual and planned giving campaigns and capital fundraising. In addition, Rich consults with numerous local nonprofit organizations in the areas of strategic planning, philanthropy, and nonprofit leadership. In fact, he played a pivotal role in helping TRIAD develop our strategic plan. Rich received his bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Delaware. He is a certified fundraising executive and has been a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals since 1988. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you. And I just want to say, Carla, I heard your story from you before, but even I was choking up back there. Thank you for sharing this morning. I had another F word. Fundraising. Now that that's out of the way. I remember the first time I came to the breakfast, I think we had 60, 70 people, and we wondered how the doors were going to stay open. And under the board's leadership, and with my wife's leadership, unfortunately she's not here this morning, and Eric, and we're the rest of the board members. Let me just see a quick show of hands. These folks went out around town, started the breakfast, and started talking to funders to move organization forward. But I'm going to ask these two tables to just stand up. Could you both stand up? Stand up. Like, oh, we don't want to be part of Rich's thing. Please. Thank you, Tara. If you could turn around and face us. Since breakfast started, these people died in the United States of America. Every 9 minutes, someone who looks like us, who works with us, who's in our family, dies of the addiction that we're trying desperately to work on. So just take a quick look. And I'd like you to reach out and pick up the envelope that's on the table. Reach out and touch that envelope that's on the table. And I want you to think about which person you're going to save. So as soon as you're ready to write a check and put it in the envelope, raise your hand, and one of them will be served by TRIAD today, and will stay alive. Because that's what we do. Without the start of counseling and therapy, they don't have a chance. And think about everybody here whose recovery story. Who here had no help at all? Who here never talked to a counselor, never talked to a therapist? Nobody ever showed them the door to a meeting? Nobody. We need TRIAD to be there. So, who's going to start? Somebody, one person sits down, two, start over here. You're alive. Sit. You can sit. And I want you to hand your envelope with a check in it to your table captain. Tara, you're going to get to sit down. No one's saving you yet. I think they're waiting. Okay, you can all sit. You can save yourself. You can save yourself. This is how personal this has to be for us. We have to remember, if we're asking to reach into our financial resources, and it's going to hurt a little bit, what did it feel like for them to just stand? Were you uncomfortable standing? Yeah, it doesn't feel good to know this is how close it is. Without you doing what you're about to do in the next minute or two by writing a check, we lose one of them. And that's what TRIAD's doing for us. We're saving people every day. It's very simple. But what we need to do is we need to do more, and we need to say yes to more people to get into the treatment and get through the doors. So if you can take a minute and write your checks, I'd like to, who are our table captains? Do we raise your hand? If you could begin to pass them over to your table captains, and if you don't have a table captain, I will come by. If you want to add 2 or 3 more zeros to that, there's still time. There's still time. So I just want to turn this over to Jillian to close out. I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for your generosity of spirit, and I want to thank you for your generosity of self. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. I hope you all agree that it's been a great program this morning, and we're really glad you all could come. Thanks for being here, and have a great day.